Hi, and welcome back. It's John Petersen from the Arlington Institute. You found yourself at Postscript. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. John McMichael, who is a research scientist in the medical and healthcare space. And he has worked his way, along with a lot of other of our mutual friends from the Society of Scientific Exploration, around the wonderful fringy edge of science, and particularly as he characterizes it, energy kind of therapies. And so, welcome back, John.
Thank you, sir.
So, talk to us a little bit more about some of the other kind of things that you've been thinking about, or how do you? I mean, you allude to the fact that you have no idea about how this all works, but you must have some ideas.
Yeah, that's a hook. Thank you. We do have some ideas, but my guess is that our ideas are going to look terribly primitive before too long, because we explain it in traditional terms. That's the vocabulary we have, and what we're seeing is not traditional, and so. Maybe some other people are going to have to explain it better as we learn more. But here's the nut of it. Just for example, to get back to the brain injury business, we know, and I say that a bit in quotation,
Yeah.
We know from what we've studied in biology since we were little kids that brain tissue doesn't regenerate. Or if it does, it's so slow that we're going to die before it gets very far along.
That's what they've been saying.
So if a person has a serious brain injury, that's that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what happens when you have a serious brain injury? And let's define serious brain injury for a second. We look at it as maybe a patient that's in a coma for 6 weeks after the injury. That patient has had a serious traumatic brain injury. They're going to have a new normal. Depending on what part of the brain was involved, they might be able to live on their own. They might not be able to. They might need 24/7 care, whatever the case might be. But our notion is that they're in tough shape.
Yeah.
And what can be done about it? Well, there are some things. There can be training, rehab services that are good, things like that. We were more interested in determining, can we do something within the brain itself that would change either the architecture of the brain and allow things to move, or can we stimulate healing? Can there be a healing process in the brain that we can fiddle around with and make work? When the injury occurs, there's usually an infiltration of what are called microglial cells. Not important to remember that, but they are arbiters of inflammation.
Mm.
And it's the chronic inflammation that's the problem. But clearly, there's more to it than just that, or you could be taking aspirin, get over your inflammation, and that would be it. We wondered if there might not be some way of manipulating those cells or manipulating the environment in which those cells exist to change that situation. And we latched onto a molecule that seems to do that. The molecule that we use for this therapeutic approach is called streptolysine. And that's the exotoxin of the streptococcus organism that causes strep throat.
Exotoxin means?
Means it's the toxin, in a sense, exuded by the bacterium that causes the pain of strep throat.
Oh.
But if you take that molecule and treat it with oxygen, it's no longer toxic.
Mm.
And it has some very interesting characteristics that we've worked on for the last 2 decades or more. And one of those characteristics is that it can reverse scarring. And we thought that might be important in the brain.
Yeah.
Now, the brain doesn't have scars of the sort that you see superficially. But nevertheless, it does have scars of its own unique sort. We wondered if our molecule would do anything for that scarring. If it did, what would be the consequence of that? Well, we thought maybe there'd be decreased inflammation, the scar tissue would be decreased or eliminated so that nerve impulses could be transmitted from point A to point B more efficiently. That would allow for perhaps regaining characteristics that had been lost as a consequence of the accident. So that's what we did. We started working with a few patients. Actually, we started working with a few NFL players who have histories of brain injuries, and we found that they started showing improvement. Improvement in the sense of being able to remember things. One of the players said, "I can read again." And I said, "What do you mean? You couldn't make out the words? What was the?" He said, "No, I could read, but by the time I got to the bottom of the page, I didn't know what I had read at the top of the page."
Oh, wow.
And he says, "Now I can read a novel and follow it the whole way through." Well, that's an improvement in quality of life.
No kidding.
We had other things that happened too. We had a physician, for example, that was in a terrible car accident, and as typical for these patients with the traumatic brain injuries, they'll often go through a sequence of events where they lose their jobs, lose their families,
Sure.
and lose their homes, and sometimes take their lives. I mean, it's a horrible progression. This physician had all the normal problems of memory loss and so forth. He lost his ability to practice medicine. He lost a family. He suffered from hyperacusis, which just means exaggerated response to sound. And there was no sound that bothered him more than his children's voices.
Wow, that's tough.
That's tough. There goes the family. It was interesting. This physician accompanied us once to a meeting with the military. This is after he was being treated and getting better, getting his family back together, able to remember things and so forth. And we thought that the military might be interested in this work because of brain injuries among service people. And in the parking lot, before going in to talk with the representatives from the armed forces, he said, "Is it all right if I wear this shirt?" Well, it was a black and white check shirt under a sport coat. And how excited can you get about that? I said, "Yeah, wear that shirt. That's just fine." So we went in and had our conversation, told the military what we were doing and so forth, and towards the end, we got talking about individual case histories, one of which is the physician who was accompanying us. And he made the comment that he said, a year ago, I couldn't have been in this meeting wearing this shirt. And we all kind of said, well, why not? Because the shirt would have driven me nuts. I would have had to take it off or leave the room, because the alternating black and white checks would have been just too much stimulation.
Well, this is fascinating because you're working your way down the edge of this whole notion that you brought up in the first segment that we talked about, saying about how do you communicate information between, how is information communicated, essentially, is the question. And so, in one hand, you're talking about information of different kind of character being influencing this man, his shirt, and so on. But you also mentioned, interestingly enough, the experiment of using the laser past a piece of iron onto an organism that thrived with iron, and the laser carried the information. Now, you're certainly familiar with some of the work in Russia, where I think Gariev, I think his name is, Dr. Gariev, did similar kind of work with salamanders and frog eggs, and being able to shoot a laser at a frog, put the laser on the salamander eggs, and the salamander eggs turn into frog eggs and generate frogs and all their progeny, all of the downstream generations. And so there's something going on here writ large across the whole, in the space, that whether you're holding a cage of mice and reading a book or watching television, as we talked about in the earlier segment, or whatever else, you talk about 5G and wireless and others. There's information going on here that's really fascinating.
Well, it is. And here's a problem with our brain injury medicine. It's safe. We've shown that. We need to do the formal clinical trials, which we want to do. But the problem is this. we put a known amount of this active molecule in a vial. Okay? After 17 hours, you can't find it anymore. And we know where it is. It's stuck to the glass.
Oh.
But it's not in the drop that the patient is taking. So what's happening? What is in the drop? Is it just the energy
Yeah.
from that molecule? Or
Or
is
the
it,
information, yeah.
that's exactly right. Or is it in such a tiny concentration in the drop that it's undetectable, but still there? We don't know. That gets back to the question you asked in the first series. Are we looking at homeopathy?
Yeah, right.
Well, in a sense, yes, in that we're in very low concentrations, but there's still something there that's active.
Well, there's a waveform. There's an energetic signature that gets transferred and carried in ways that we don't understand. I mean, in a sense, this is at some level, what intuition is about. Because when you walk into a room and you feel something, you have all of this information that gets generated about the context or the person or whatever it is. I mean, how does that work?
Well, it's an interesting question in a couple ways. I think what we're looking at is a bridge between biochemistry and biophysics. The bio part, because we're talking about living systems, but walking into a room, for example, and you know that you might like this person. I've never met this person before, but you know you like them right off the bat. Well, that's energy. Now, biochemists might say that's a pheromone response. And we don't hear much about pheromones anymore. You know, back, 25, 30 years ago, they were a big deal. We did a little experiment in my lab when I was a professor, just for me to start to understand the power of pheromones. And this sounds a little off color, but it's not really. At the time, pheromones were a big deal. They were in the scientific literature, and the idea was you could do crowd control with pheromones and so forth. And clearly, pheromone traps are used for insects now. And the idea is with just a few molecules of a female pheromone, a male insect from 2 miles away will be attracted. They're very powerful. I was curious on the humanistic side as just to what pheromones could do. So I asked one of my graduate students, a good-looking young lady, if she would be part of my experiment. And yep, she said she would. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just stand over here on this side of the lab tomorrow, and I want you to dress provocatively. I mean, not so much you get kicked off campus, but just dress really, really nice. And I'm going to have a very tiny test tube with just a few molecules of female pheromone taped to the wall on the other side of the lab, okay? And I'm going to bring some of our male graduate students in for a conference, and I want to see what they do, okay? One at a time. They all migrated to the wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that's a simple dimple experiment. It doesn't prove anything except the power of what you're talking about, information. And clearly, the young graduate student, the female graduate student, has pheromones. She was exuding pheromones. They might not have been as concentrated as what was in that tube, but what kind of information went from that tube to those male graduate students that
Well, you talked in the earlier segment about holding the cage, and on your left hand, all of the mice that were sick were going over to the left hand, so maybe all those guys were sick and they needed
maybe that was it.
They needed something.
Whatever it was. But my point is that there's this kind of information. We're thinking of it all as electric or light or whatever, but there are these chemicals involved too. And so we've got to get this balance, and I don't pretend to know what that balance is or just how to interpret it, but it's as exciting as can be. And the fact, as we mentioned in the first segment, that you can capture that energy on a CD.
Yeah.
Well, what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, and understand, this is absolutely unrefined energy. My guess is that if you got different frequencies, you would get different responses. I don't know. You're the engineer, I'm not. But my guess is that once we learn to, for lack of a better word, manipulate this or control it, you would have a very powerful healing approach, but it could also be very powerful on the negative side.
Yeah, well, certainly it's fungible. I probably would work both ways. When they make the CD, what's the input? Is there a microphone? Is there a
There are microphones and sensors that are playing into the into the CD. While
they're just kind of open in the environment.
that's
right?
all it is. Yep. But as I mentioned, though whatever information is on that CD does change the genomic pattern of cells in culture. So different genes are up and down regulated than would otherwise be expected. It does change the genes in a tumor in a mouse, as well as the genes in the mouse devoid of the tumor. There's something going on there, and it's inaudible.
Yeah.
We don't even know what we have.
What I want to know is, can you get me some more hair?
Maybe, but it might grow out the middle of your back. We don't know how well we control it. We just don't know. It's a fascinating.
Can you get my eyesight back to where it used to be?
Well, we're doing some work on hearing, and you can get your hearing back.
Tinnitus? You can get rid of tinnitus?
Tinnitus and what's called presbycusis, the age-related loss of ability to hear the high tones. And this is called normal aging in our society. We find that we can get that back, and we have a sound engineer who is one of our patients who can now, for the first time in some number of years, distinguish the sounds of the different instruments in an orchestra.
Wow.
So his hearing has become more acute in that sense.
So now the drops you're talking about for the chronic brain,
Traumatic brain.
Traumatic brain. You said that it eliminates inflammation, essentially, right? Now, you could make the broad theoretical case that some have, is that memory loss is a function of inflammation that might be generated by sugar and other such kind of things. But might your drops be generally kind of extendable across?
Yeah, let's. You raised a couple of interesting points, and I'll be conscious of time here. But the drop can be used for treating dementia, but it's more powerful if we add another couple molecules to it, a couple different other molecules. By itself, it is some help. Otherwise, it can be made stronger. The important thing is inflammation is not all bad. Clearly, it's one of our first defenses.
Right.
But there are those that would argue that it's also our limit to longevity.
Yeah.
Is inflammation. And here's the story, is that as long as we are functioning, we are inflamed. We have certain degrees of inflammation all the time. For example, you never think of blood cells rolling along blood vessels as causing inflammation. But there's a tiny amount of friction between those cells and the walls of the blood vessels. How does the body respond to that? By laying down collagen. That's the primary component of scar tissue.
Right.
So over the years, normal aging, we have collagen laid down in blood vessels, which results in what? Decreased elasticity of the blood vessel, and you get high blood pressure. Normal aging. All of the organs will show collagen deposition over time, and there is what's called the collagen theory of aging. That collagen deposition reaches a certain level, the organ function decreases in functionality to a critical level, and you're dead.
Right.
That's it. So, like everything else, inflammation is both good in terms of a defensive mechanism and long-term bad. So you want to...
So how do you get rid of the collagen? Do you have drops?
Yep. That's how we do it. Exactly right.
Such a deal.
Yeah. And what's interesting here, just like holding the mice and the tumor gets better, but nothing else changes. With the drops for the collagen, the scar will go away, but your nose doesn't fall off, because that's all collagen.
Yeah.
But it's only those portions of the body that need it that will use that signal. Just like it's only the tumor that uses the energy from that left hand to heal the tumor.
Fascinating discussion.
So go explain
that.
So
much fun. Thank you for coming.
Lots of it's my pleasure.
With us. Our guest today has been Dr. John McMichael, who is a research scientist and works in the healthcare and bioscience space. If you followed all of this, and particularly go back and listen to the first segment if you haven't already. It's just fascinating, kind of interesting work that's out on the fringy edge of not only dealing with problems and issues that heretofore, for centuries, have been considered impossible to do anything about, but also are raising the whole notion of a whole new paradigm in the way that you understand and think about how reality works. And so it's been fun to have him with us. And John is here as part of the Transition Talk series that we host here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, just 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. We do this every month. You can find out complete information about it at transitiontalks.org. And we hope that you'll come out and be with us. We've got a wonderful lineup that goes all the way for a year from now of great, very provocative kind of speakers. So thanks again. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute. And come back and see us.